Why risk wasting time and effort and money on something that isn't going to work? Because it might bruise my ego is the answer, right? When I find, and really that's the frustrating part, right? It's the thing that keeps us from building these cultures of learning consistently, is this idea that it's not okay to be wrong in an organization. It's not okay to be wrong at the leadership level or the team level. And so we're just going to make a decision. We're going to make some estimates around it. We're going to build. Okay? Best of luck, right? You're going to be wrong to some extent. Why not find out ahead of time?
Welcome to Fractional, Jeff.
It's my pleasure to be here, Alexis. Thanks for inviting me.
In my early stage career, your books have been very fundamental to how I grew.
Josh Seid and I have been writing books for a long time, and it's look, you never know if these things resonate, so it's nice to hear. So thank you for saying that.
For those who are uninitiated, maybe you can introduce yourself to our audience.
Absolutely. My name is Jeff Gothelf. I worked in my career as a UX designer and as an information architect, as a product manager, as a team leader, as an entrepreneur. And these days I work as part of Sense and Respond Learning, which is a company I co-founded with Josh Seid, who I've been collaborating with for 15 years. And we teach organizations product management. We teach organizations product discovery and a lot of the content from our book, Lean UX. And we teach organizations OKRs. And we do that through workshops and training, videos, books, and speeches. And that's how I spend my days these days.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. So one thing that I see a lot of people confused about is what's the difference between like traditional user research and just product discovery?
When I started my career, user research meant 2 days in a lab somewhere, tons of money, 20 users, and a lot of candy. If you've ever been in those labs, because you're sitting on kind of the other side of that two-way mirror, right? So you can see them, but they can't see you. And you're sitting in there for 8 hours a day, and there's just buckets of candy. They just keep you're just sitting there eating candy, and watching these folks go through a script that you wrote and that someone else is delivering. At least that was kind of the nature of user research when I started working professionally. And look, what was interesting about that is that was very strong evidence that you would generate towards doing something or not doing something or changing something or not changing something. But the reality is that by the time the fifth person went through that, the sixth person went through that, you knew exactly what they were going to say. And you had to sit through 4 more people that day and 10 people the next day, right? And so the reality was that this was not a sustainable method for you doing research. The other part was cost and time. And so what would happen is your project manager or your client or your boss or whoever would be like, look, we can do this once. Okay, maybe once per project, maybe. And that's it. So you get one shot at research. So when do you do it? It's really wasteful because by the 5th, 6th, 7th user, you know exactly what people are going to say. And the fact is, you don't get another shot at research. So what have we stopped learning at this point? And so that was highly problematic to begin with. And then the world went agile, right? Which of course everyone is these days, or some version of it. But like the point is that the speed of product design and development has gone up significantly. And we just don't have time to do those kinds of big studies and then never do them again. I mean, there's always a time and a place for good research, anthropological research, and to get out there and kind of build a foundational understanding of your target audience. But when it comes to doing product-specific research, interface research, usability research, assumptions validation research, we can do it much faster. And that process today is called product discovery. And it's not like we threw away everything we did back then. We just took all that stuff and we just chopped it up into small pieces and we do it consistently, right? So instead of talking to 20 users, we talk to 3 or 4, and we do that every week. Instead of talking to them for hours at a time, we do it for 15, 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Instead of hiring a big, research facility to do it, we do it like this, through Zoom or we meet at a Starbucks or whatever it is. And we find lots and lots of different lightweight tools to help us convey the things that we'd like to learn about. And so fundamentally, that's the difference. It's instead of doing this big one thing up front, this one time up front, it's doing less but more often and more frequently and continuously.
And what I find interesting, especially if the people involved are in a position of power as a decision maker, these insights from product discovery lead into the company strategy, right? Especially if you're in a startup, because you're always talking to the customers, you're trying to understand what to build next, and that's how I want to start talking about the different canvases that you've designed. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, look, the canvas craze was started by Alex Osterwalder with the business model canvas, and essentially, what Alex did there was he took his process, which was business model generation, again, a very light way to develop and deliver business models, and he built this facilitation tool called the business model canvas. And the purpose of the business model canvas, and really any canvas, is to extract assumptions out of people's heads, right? It's a facilitation tool. So if there's a multi-step process that you'd like to go through with your team, and you want to get all these various assumptions out of people's heads and onto a board or a digital whiteboard, or it's just a shared workspace, canvases are fantastic for that, right? In some ways, it's a step-by-step guide to building shared understanding. The problem, right, when we work together as a team, particularly a cross-functional team, product designers, product managers, engineers, clients, et cetera, is that we think everybody else thinks the same thing.
That's dangerous.
It's dangerous, right? Because I mean, I worked at a company called The Ladders in New York years ago, and there were 8 executives on the leadership team, and we did a persona exercise with them, and they're like, "Oh, of course we know who the customer is." Right? Between 8 of them, they came up with 21 different personas. Right? Everybody thinks something different. And so what the canvases do is they facilitate the right conversation with your team to get everybody's ideas out, and then to coalesce around some version of those ideas that allows us to get moving and to do it quickly. And so when we started to build the lean UX process, which was, again, product discovery, lean UX is the same thing. Over time, the process that we were teaching became consistent. And so we decided that this was a good moment to codify that stability in the process in a canvas. And that was the Lean UX canvas. So it had 8 boxes, still has 8 boxes, 8 steps, and you can follow it sequentially through a process of declaring your business problem, and then your success criteria, and your personas and persona goals, and your solutions, and then forming that into hypotheses, and later designing experiments to test those hypotheses. And that was what we wrote about in Lean UX, and that was a really nice summary of that. And people really like that tool because it really helped them build activities that led to productive shared understanding with their colleagues and with their clients. More recently, we've updated that canvas to be called the Lean Product Canvas, simply because Lean UX, it excludes people with the name. People, oh, well, that's for the UX folks.
Mm.
We don't need that. That's not for us. And realistically, the way the material has evolved over the last 15 years is it's for product development. It's for the entire team. So the Lean Product Canvas is the Lean UX canvas updated with new terminology, new prompts, and inclusive language that says, look, we're all working on this together. Let's acknowledge that.
You know how I react to these kinds of things is that it always depends on the organization's understanding of what user experience is. Because I feel like if you're a veteran in the field, you'd almost always say that, oh, UX encompasses everything, so that but that's like I would say an assumption, I guess, when you wrote down the name or the brand of the canvas.
I was a UX designer. Josh was a UX designer. Both of us were leading design teams in a world where every organization was adopting agile software development methods. Agile software development in its original form, in the manifesto, et cetera, even in the Scrum, sort of the Scrum guide, doesn't talk about design, not explicitly and not as a core member of the team. And that was a real problem. And so when we developed these ideas, they were designed to ensure that designers had a place in the agile process. It was a solution to the question, how do you involve design in the agile software development process? The reality was that and especially over time as we evolved the material, is that this was no longer just a design process. So it started off as a design process. That's why it was called Lean UX. That was our background. That's what made sense at the time. But the evolution of the material has taken into account product management and engineering deliberately and explicitly, to the point where calling it Lean UX doesn't do it justice.
Considering that you want to pull in product engineering and design, there's no way organizations can move forward these days without, the topic of your latest book, OKRs. Jeff, there's like a ton of books on OKRs. Like, why do you write about it again?
Yeah, so our latest book is called Who Does What by How Much. In fact, here it is. There it is. It's about OKRs, objectives and key results. It's a good question. It's interesting, by the way. This is my fifth book, and it's my third book with Josh Seiden. And when we self-publish now, but when we published our first two books, they were published with O'Reilly initially, and then Harvard Business Review Press. When you submit a book proposal to a publisher, they ask you this question, right? Why does the world need this book, right? List your competitors, right? What are the other books that are out there? And then how is your book different in the market? So it's a great question. There aren't a ton of OKR books out there, to be fair, right? Like if you think about sort of the most significant ones, at least the ones that most people cite, let's just call it that. It's not to say that there aren't others, right? There's John Doerr's Measure What Matters, which is a business book written by legendary investor John Doerr, touting the benefits of OKRs without really explaining what they are or how they work, but making you sort of have a little bit of FOMO because Google used it to get big, and Intel used it to get big, and Bono uses it, and Under Armour, and all these successful companies. And celebrities. Don't you want to be a celebrity? OKRs make you a celebrity. That's my quote. So that book was great. Came out in 2016, and it made CEOs aware of the existence of OKRs, even though they've been around for 40 years. That was great. Christina Whitkey wrote Radical Focus. Fantastic book. Really practical, tactical book about how to develop OKRs for one team, basically in a startup situation. Really great book. And then Nivens and Lamort wrote an OKR coaching book. So that kind of when you're teaching OKRs or coaching OKRs in an organization, here's how to do it. So why did we write an OKR book? Well, a couple things. First of all, we felt like a practical, tactical book on OKRs at scale was missing from the market, number one. Number two, we take a very opinionated stance in our book that your OKRs must be customer-centric. Your objective is going to focus on a future customer state or benefit that you'd like to create for your customer, and your key results are going to be outcomes, measures of human behavior, and the behavior of the humans that you serve. And this is missing from the conversation, this very strong stance on that. We believe that without that, OKRs don't really have a lot of teeth. They don't really have a lot of differentiating value, right? But when you focus them, when you create customer-centric OKRs, then everything changes for the better but it's a difficult change. And so that's why we wrote the book, to get these ideas out that everyone has a customer, right? Everyone goes to work and makes a thing, and there's a human being that consumes that thing. And that the measure of success for delivering value to that customer is an outcome. It's a measure, it's measuring their behavior change. And then how do you do that? And how do you do that at scale? And that's why we wrote the book.
So one of your common pitfalls on the book is most people write key results as task lists. And I've done OKRs so many times at like our company, right? Like we do it quarterly, sometimes monthly, because like it's part of a different system that we have. But then this still happens to us, um, or at least like a sub bullet points under a key result. But then why do you think most people do this?
So it's interesting, right? There's two pitfalls, right? So the one pitfall is people will put output as their key result. An output is a thing that we make. So a feature, a product, a service, a bug fix, whatever it is, right? And we talk about we steer them away from that. So when we steer them away from outputs towards outcomes, they'll say measures of human behavior. They'll say, okay, tasks, right? The name of our book is Who Does What by How Much, right? Why? Because that's how we teach people to write good key results, right? You've written a human-centric, customer-centric key result when it answers the question, who does what by how much, right? So then people say, well, a task list, that's got those components, right? So like our key results are going to be, I don't know, software engineer writes 1,000 lines of code, right? Designer creates prototype, something like that, right? Those are that's a task list, right? Who, right? Designer does what? Creates prototype. By how much? Well, one, right? It sort of answers the question. So isn't that right? No. A task is an output, right? Ticking items off a task list means that you have completed the task and likely produced something, right? A prototype, 1,000 lines of code. You've implemented a policy. Maybe you've installed a new piece of software, productivity software, whatever it is, right? What we want to know is after you did that, what happened, right? The people that you serve, how did their behavior change, right? So designer built prototype. What happened? Well, the number of questions that we got from the client team on average have reduced by 50%.
Mm.
Okay. Right. That's how we know that building a prototype was a good idea and that we built a good prototype. Right. So that's fundamentally like task lists feel like who does what by how much, but they're not. They're still output.
Approaching, the age of AI, a lot of people are grappling with how you reconcile OKRs, outcomes, tangible metrics related to like pirate metrics to like let's say an AI prototype, right? I think the fundamentals don't change, right? Like the outcome is still the most important thing. And as you've written in your latest blog post around this, AI is just one output. It should lead to an outcome.
That's what I believe, right? I believe that AI is a feature. It's a powerful feature. It's a feature we can do a lot of new and interesting and differentiating things with, but we should be deliberate about that, right? What are we trying to make better for the customer, for the user with AI? What will they be able to do faster, easier, in a more delightful manner, more efficiently, right? Now that we have AI, like it's not why because inevitably what's happened here is everyone's just throwing AI into their products and saying, "We'll build it, add it, add. We need AI in the tool." Well, why? Right? The fundamental question of my entire career has been, why are you doing that? Right? And the overwhelming answer over the majority of my career has been, I don't know. Or my boss told me to, or because the other guys are doing it, so we have to, right? I want you to be deliberate, right? I want you to say, Like right now, on average, right, we build an email client, and on average, people have 1,000 unread emails in their inbox. We can see that, right? So we're going to help folks get out from, inbox overload. Okay. And our goal is to make sure that on average, our users have fewer than 100 unread emails in their inbox on a weekly basis, right? So that's a 90% reduction in unread emails, right? Who does what by how much, right? Email users reduce the number of unread emails in their inbox by 90%. Okay. That's a key result. That's a goal. Okay? How are we going to do that? Well, we could call every user and be like, hey, answer your emails. Answer it. It's an option, right? We can send them an email to remind them to check their emails, right? Is it ridiculous, but there's 1,000 things that you can do, including AI, right? We're going to implement some kind of AI, smart functionality that will sort through people's inboxes and help them sift through the good stuff, get rid of the annoying stuff, unsubscribe from the spam, etc. Okay. That's a compelling story. That's a compelling use case. It doesn't mean that the AI is going to achieve that, but at the very least, you're tying the deployment of AI to a specific customer need or a customer problem, and you're measuring the success of that not through the deployment of AI. What's successful? We built it. No, right? We're measuring by, did our users reduce the amount of unread emails in their inboxes by 90%? That's how we know we've delivered value, right? And so by all means, use AI, implement it into your products and services, right? But do it in the service of a real customer need and measure the success by whether or not you've changed customer behavior for the better. That's all. And if it didn't work, right, try again, right? Pivot on it, iterate it, optimize it. And if the AI ultimately is just generating noise and waste, take it out, right? I talk about this in that article that you mentioned, but I like email because kind of everybody still uses it, which is super interesting, by the way. Nothing has killed email yet. But
I think you use Spark, right?
Huh?
I think you use Spark.
I do. I use Spark,
And
I love it. Right? It's a great. I genuinely love it. The collaboration tools are fantastic. And they put AI in it, and I never use it. Like the time, like they want me to compose messages with AI. It's never going to happen, right? It's never going to be able to write in my voice the way that I write and give the answers that I wanted to give, right? I would much prefer if they just spent some of those development resources on product stability. That would be nice because occasionally it bugs out, and that bugs me. So that's my point. That's my only point. Do it for a specific user need and measure value by changes in the user's behavior.
What are your thoughts about, experimentation these days?
We're at a point right now where we can learn so fast, so easily, whether or not our ideas hold water, have some kind of value. We may not know sort of overwhelmingly yes or overwhelmingly no. That does happen, but it's rare that you get a kind of a definitive, yes or no. But we can learn so fast. We've got so many great tools for creating prototypes, for creating, AI, right? Using AI tools to create, a workflow and tweak it and show it to a customer. Gosh, you could do that so much faster today than we could do it 5 years ago. No-code tools allow us to quickly hack together a workflow that kind of does what we want the product to do. Right. The DevOps world that we live in now allows us to get small ideas into the hands of real customers as fast as we want, and to measure the impact of those things and learn from those things. That's a tremendous opportunity to reduce the amount of stuff that we build that doesn't work. Right. The only thing stopping us from sort of consistently deploying this technology and this ability, just call it this ability, into the world is culture. It's organizational culture, right? There is this overwhelming feeling still in most companies, and certainly the ones that I work with today, that the bosses know what's best. The bosses tell the teams what to build, and the teams don't question it, right? And the reality is the boss is a human, and the boss can't predict the future, and the boss is working from their experience and their expertise, and they're taking a bunch of guesses about what they think they should be doing. Why risk wasting time and effort and money on something that isn't going to work? Because it might bruise my ego, is the answer, right? When I find, and really that's the frustrating part, right? It's the thing that keeps us from building these cultures of learning consistently, is this idea that it's not okay to be wrong in an organization. It's not okay to be wrong at the leadership level or the team level. And so we're just going to make a decision. We're going to make some estimates around it. And we're going to build. Okay. Best of luck, right? You're going to be wrong to some extent. Why not find out ahead of time, right? That's the issue. But as far as opportunities for learning, they're tremendous today. Like literally, there's no excuse for not building learning into your process. Like it's not, we started this conversation when I told you about these 2-day, $30,000, research
Usability
sessions.
testing labs.
Yeah. We don't have to do that anymore. We can learn every week in just a couple of hours. We can learn something that helps us course correct just a little bit every time.
And actually, I wanted to ask you about, feeling safe to manage up and using OKRs as an artifact to actually do that.
Look, psychological safety in an organization is critical to learning, right? If it's not okay for me to admit that I'm wrong, or if it's risky for me to say, hey, team, hey, boss, I learned this thing, and it contradicts the plan, and then people are going to share that information, and we're not going to have these learning organizations, right? And so building that psychological safety is absolutely crucial to building a learning organization. Now, the nice thing about OKRs is if we use them the way that we describe in our book, we build these customer-centric OKRs, and we commit not to features, but to changes in customer behavior as a measure of success, then as we start to build stuff, as we start to test stuff, and we start to put it out into the world, we can measure whether or not the needle is moving in the right direction, right? Are we trending towards our key results? And if the answer is no, then we can go back to our bosses and say, look, this is not a subjective opinion, right? Our goal is to increase retention by 50%. And we've been deploying the ideas that you came up with, that we came up with, and we're increasing retention by 2, 3, 4%. That's what we're seeing. We're not seeing any significant movement. And so based on that and the reasons why those ideas didn't move the needle, we think we should pivot to this new idea to drive retention. And so what you're doing is you're making evidence-based decisions. And in theory, those should be safe. They should be, right? I don't know that they are, but they should be. But that's organizational agility, to be super clear, right? Changing course based on evidence is being agile, right? That's what agility is all about. But at least OKRs let us frame these course corrections in terms of objective evidence, rather than I don't think it's a good idea or I disagree with
Rather
you.
than ad hominem statements.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know what you're talking about, right? I'm much smarter than you. Exactly. It takes all that out of the equation. It just says, look, this is what's happening. This was our goal. We're not heading towards the goal. We want to change direction. Here's our proposed direction. Right. That's it. Now, again, that should be safe. It's not always safe. And so if you're a leader listening to this, the way that you make it safe is you model that behavior. So when you find out that your idea was wrong, you stand up in front of your team and you say, look, I know we said we should build this, and I thought it was going to help us drive retention by 50%. It's not. I was wrong. Here's what we've learned, and here's the direction change that we're taking on because of what we've learned along the way. When you model that behavior for your team, they see that it's safe to behave that way, and they'll start doing the same thing.
You know what I like about this is it's the humility around it, and it actually it's part of your one of your books too, like being forever employable, right? Like don't be afraid to kill your darlings and
Hmm.
reset.
It sucks, you know. Like we all love our ideas. I love my ideas. I think my ideas are awesome. I do. But you know what? They don't always work out. And when they don't work out at a certain point, you let them go. And you learn from it, and then you do something differently the next time, hopefully.
Considering that you also wrote, forever employable, right? And we are approaching the age of AI. If you were gonna start from a blank slate with your career, how
Yeah.
would you approach it, considering the
Uh,
context we have now?
well, it's interesting because I've two kids who are essentially entering the working world um, now and in the next 4 or 5 years. Um, I think understanding AI, understanding its capabilities, understanding its power, understanding the way it's been transforming jobs is crucial. I don't think you can afford to ignore it if you're just starting out. I think you need to figure out which tools are going to help you advance quickly in your career, and 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 then ultimately, you know, what I've seen is significant enhancements in productivity and efficiency more than anything else. Right? Sort of, there's some idea generation, sure, but like going from zero to something, which is the hardest part of any creative process. And all the work that we do is creative, right? No matter what you do, like even if you're making budgets, right? On day zero, you're staring at a blank spreadsheet, which is terrifying, right? Any blank page is terrifying. So going from zero to something is tremendous. So how do you maximize the tools to allow you to go from zero to something? And then how do you maximize the tools to sort of help you reduce the noise and get smarter about things? To me, that's the base level of understanding that you need to have today. And then beyond that, right, you can specialize a bit more if you're going into that field or whatever, specific fields where there are, industry specific AI driven tools. But I think fundamentally, like any new technology, you need to understand what it can do and how it's deployed, and be particularly with this, because it's so accessible to everybody. How are you using it to make yourself more efficient, more productive, faster, more successful right now?
For sure. And we have a very active, consulting network or in different fields, even in product design and user experience. You outline a lot of very helpful ideas actually in Forever Employable, right? That do apply to helping consultants attract more business
Yeah,
and also develop their thought leadership. And you're a consultant yourself, right? Like
I
you've
am.
started different companies.
Yeah.
Any tips right now that's top of mind that would help emerging consultants build their business more?
The most valuable thing that I've learned, that I've done, at least that's worked for me, is to be generous to the community, to give back to the community consistently, right? So share what you've learned. Here's a thing that happened and what I learned from it. Here's a new idea I've been kicking around and using with some clients. What do you think? Here's a canvas, sorry, that we put together. Give it a shot. Let me know what you think. Keep sharing back, right? Because what happens is people start to see you as a generous member of the community. They learn from you. They use your tools. Maybe they have a conversation with you. They come see you speak or whatever it is, right? Um, and then when they need help with a thing that you're an expert in, you're top of mind, right? Oh, we need someone to help with this. Well, I've been reading this guy, Jeff Gothelf, for like the last 5 years. This is primarily what he talks about. Let's go talk to that guy, right? So to me, that's been the most successful lead generation tool is just sharing content, sharing ideas, participating in conversations, being visible in the community, like just being a part of the conversation and sharing proactively. And I know that, and I've talked to a couple of kind of wannabe authors slash consultants recently, and they're terrified of sharing their stuff. What if someone steals it? It's my IP, right? And I feel that. I do. Like, technically, that's a risk. You know what? But there are very few thieves out there, number one. Number two, there are, there's date stamps and things like that. And there's a community. And what I found, and sadly, this seems to happen to my female colleagues more so than my male colleagues. But when it does happen, when someone takes somebody's material and either copies it verbatim and puts their name on it, or steals a framework and doesn't give credit, not only well, obviously, do you go back and sort of call the person out and say, look, this is my work. Here's when I published it first. Here's my date. You're not crediting me. But the community usually regulates itself pretty well. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and the community, as you know, if you build enough goodwill,
Exactly.
sharing, what you know, uh, that's valuable to them, then they will vilify that person
Or at
who
least
stole
they
from
just
you.
let them know, right, that they've
Mm.
overstepped, right? Hopefully, I'm not promoting any lynch mobs, right? Like that's not what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that the community is pretty quick, and they're like, hey, this looks like a lot like Jeff's work, right, which he published over here, and then or someone will ping me. This has happened to me before, where someone's like, hey, this is your material, and it's showing up over here with no credit and attribution, and this guy's making it sound like he wrote it. Okay, thank you. I can decide what to do with that information.
What are some of the things aspiring serial book writers would need to learn, to do it well?
I write your first book. Don't aspire to be a serial book writer. Aspire to write a book. I think that's because you learn so much, right? It's super interesting. Like I have not given birth, but my wife has. I've been present for the birth of my two children, and the way my wife describes giving birth is similar to, it sounds to me like much less painful, but similar to like writing a book. Like you work on this thing for a long time, a year or two, and then it finally sees the light of day, right? It's finally out. You birth this thing into the world, and you breathe a sigh of relief, and then you're like, oh, I am never doing that again, right? Which is kind
And
of,
yet you write one again.
then 6 months passes, or 9 months passes, or a year, and you forget. You forget the painful parts, and you see majority positive parts, right? And so you're like, I could do that again, right? And then you go again, and you do it again. So it's similar in that way to childbirth. I think. Again, I've witnessed it. I've never done it. But to me, like, aspire to finish your first book and publish it yourself or get it published. So many authors. It's interesting. I was speaking with a friend last week, and it reminded me of a quote that I heard from another friend a long time ago when I went to write my first book. I said, "Listen, I think I'm getting a book offer, a writing offer to write a book." And he was like, and this came straight out of film school. He went to film school, and apparently on day one of film school, the professor asked everybody this question in regards to making a movie, but you can translate it to writing a book, which is, do you want to write a book, or do you want to have written a book? Right, and that's a really good question. Like, are you looking for the glory of having done it, right? Or do you actually want to, like, do you have something meaningful to share with the world? And I think that's a fair question to ask yourselves if you're setting out to write a book. And I think that it's it's a goal. Like, get that first book done. So many aspiring authors set out to write a book, they never finish a manuscript. Of those manuscripts that do get done, let's say half, only 25% ultimately ever get published. And of those 25%, very few actually do anything meaningful. So aspire to finish a book, publish it, and get it into people's hands. And then let's talk.
Any final word before we finish and wrap up?
Please buy my book, Who Does What by How Much. It's about OKRs, and tell your bosses and your companies and your clients about it. But look, I think ultimately just stay curious. To me, that's the most important thing. Is just keep learning, keep trying new things, keep evolving, and stay humble, because that's how you learn.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
My pleasure, Alexis. Thanks for having me on the show. It's fun.